So, welcome to everybody who's here. This is the meeting of the Children's Select Committee. Max, do we have any apologies?
We have apologies from Councillor Kelvin Nash, Councillor Catherine McDermott, who has been substituted by Councillor Adrian Foster, Councillor Caroline Corbyn, and also Councillor Peter Hudson sent his apologies in as well.
Thank you very much indeed. Anyone aware of anything else? And I'm sure the whole committee would join me in. Can we pass on to Catherine that we hope all is going well with her and young, was it Noah? Yeah, Kenny, where did I get Noah from? I don't know. But we hope all is well and going fine. Minutes of the previous meeting. So the minutes of the previous meeting were circulated with the agenda pack. The meeting held on 26th of November 24. Did anyone manage to spot any mistakes that Max might have made? Come on, somebody, please. No, you got away with it again, Max. Are you all happy? I can take those as a true and accurate record and sign them after the meeting. Thank you. Declarations of interest. So to receive any declarations of disclosable interests or dispensations granted by the Standards Committee. Anything in the agenda pack? Nope. Okay. So I've got a couple of announcements this morning. The first one is, if anyone hadn't spotted, we're coming up towards the end of this four-year council. Behave, Bridget. One of the things that happens then is there is an opportunity for overview and scrutiny to look back on its activity during the previous, so this doesn't actually read properly in English, but over the previous 4 years. Doing so allows us to consider our successes and challenges, including the key activities we have undertaken. We can then submit suggestions for further scrutiny under the next council and match the impact of its future activity. So that at our next meeting on 11th of March, we will receive a report outlining our key activities during the last 4 years and also proposing some future work priorities for our successor committee after the elections in May. To feed into this process, members of this committee will soon receive an email from Julie asking you to submit your ideas on what scrutiny should be looking at under the next council. I would be really grateful if you could all give this attention and reply with a few ideas. These will then be used to form a report to our next meeting and ultimately to the first meeting of the ONS Management Committee after the elections. Please don't wait until the next meeting to come up with your suggestions. We will, because we've got quite a lot of business to close off this year, have a busy meeting next time as well. And time will be tight for taking brand new suggestions from the floor. Not to say we wouldn't, but if you can email them in advance, we can do the work on them in advance that's needed to be able to bring it to the meeting in a meaningful way. One other thing, which is I'd like to propose a slight change to this morning's agenda due to a communication breakdown within the team here. The safety valve item that we've got, I'd like to take that as item 7 today after the Wiltshire Youth Framework. I'm very concerned that safety valve has been coming at the end of our regular updates, and by the time we get to it, frankly, we're all one foot out the door and don't want to look at it in any depth. We've got the quarterly report this time as well, and I think Ben deserves to feel the full joy of us looking at something in depth rather than just skimming it at the end. So I'd like to bring that forward so we've got time to look at it properly. Anybody object on that other than Ben? Okay, right, in which case, I don't believe we have any public participation today. So I will move us straight on to item 6, the Wiltshire Youth Framework, pages 41 to 70 of your agenda pack, according to this. And this is, I suppose, the substantive Cabinet response to the recommendations of the Youth Provision and Area Board Youth Funding Task Group, which reported back in September 2023 and was chaired by Councillor Trigg. So I'm going to hand over to, I assume I'm handing over to you, Rhys? No, to Ian. Handing over to Councillor Ian Blair-Pilling to introduce us on this item. And yeah, so Ian, all yours.
Thanks, John. Good morning, everybody. And thanks to the committee for letting us come back today. And a particular thanks to Jo Trigg and her task group for actually turning the spotlight on our council's youth offer and for the report that triggered everything that we're coming back to report about today. As your papers show, and I have to, sorry, and
I'm really sorry to interrupt you. I don't know why it didn't trigger. When I said members of the public, we've actually got Margaret Firth from Wiltshire Community Foundation here, who I didn't welcome. But because she's here on this item and part of the, I should just have said welcome. I apologise, but it's important members recognise who's in the room. So I'll shut up again, but I just wanted to welcome Margaret and make everybody aware that she was here, because she's not an officer, but sat with all the officers. And as often, we don't recognise every officer present.
Run me past that again. I'd actually missed what the key bit of what you said.
I was just, when we skimmed past public participation,
oh, right.
I forgot to welcome Margaret. She was hiding behind officers and is not an officer. And I wouldn't want members to think it was another officer, because Margaret is the, I forget your role at Wiltshire Community Foundation, official role at Wiltshire Community Foundation, but you're the champion of all the work on the youth work stuff that's been going on. Yeah.
Director of Partnerships at Wiltshire Community Foundation.
Yeah. But Margaret has been the mover and shaker that's done the county coordination work that's happened so far. Sorry.
No. It's welcome, because it actually highlights my next point. And I'm glad we're in the chamber today, because we've got quite a strong team here. And so we don't have to play musical chairs as we would in the other room. So no, I think that this all works. And so I have with me David Redfern. I have in particular the report's author, Rhys Shell, and I want to pay a particular tribute to the amount of work and push and dynamism that Rhys has put into this. And I think as this unfolds, you will appreciate that. And then we also have with us a new Director of Children's Services, Daryl Freeman in front here, and my colleague, Laura May, who oversees, and this is the point I want to make, all children's services and education. This whole process has in fact brought our directorates much closer, helped us to develop a more comprehensive product. On top of the great things that were already happening across the county, we now have a much clearer accountability, better communication between the officers and the multiplicity of partners, and ultimately improved opportunities and outcomes for our youth. Daryl's going to set out where this work sits and the importance of the offer and something about next steps in this. And then Rhys, I've asked to run through the specific detail of what has been delivered so far and his view of next steps in line with what is set out in the National Youth Agency and government guidance. A great deal of the work involves a multitude of external agencies, voluntary bodies, and various council services. And it's brought us to this point, but we're clear that this document that you have in your report and our updates do not provide all the answers, then it's not a finished product. I personally doubt whether you ever get to a finished product in this. What you've got to have is the framework and the momentum and the common understanding in all of this. It is, though, a substantial step forward in understanding and improving the local youth offer and how we as a council are delivering to our duty under Section 507B of the Education Act. It identifies the unique challenges of our young people, assigns accountability, provides an overview of key partners, and sets a collaborative and I cannot stress enough this word throughout all of this, vision of how to proceed. There is much to do, but now we have a much broader understanding of the totality. We've now got, and we intentionally use this word framework rather than strategy in this for our work, a much wider collaborative commitment, and all importantly, we've got momentum now. Before I hand over to Darryl, I want to update you on two of Joe's recommendations, or Joe and your task group. You asked us to remove the necessity for youth revenue grants to be new, in quotation, when they come forward. It was seen as I think everybody saw it as a significant restraint on some excellent initiatives. I can confirm that pending discussions today, we will have updated grant criteria ready for an agreement that removes that restriction. Secondly, you asked us to consider part funding the Wiltshire Youth Partnership. It's a strategic collaboration of voluntary and community sector organisations focused on the infrastructure of the youth sector. We all know how challenging finances are across the totality of local government, and however proud we in Wiltshire may be of our delivery performance, new funding is not easy to find. And I am delighted to confirm that we now have agreement in place to fund an additional £100,000. That is £50,000 of each of the next 2 financial years. But that money will go into the Wiltshire Youth Partnership. It's going to be used to increase capacity, training and support for voluntary and community sector youth organisations in Wiltshire. I'm particularly pleased that the Police and Crime Commissioner is matching our 100,000 with his or their own 100,000, but it is regrettable that Swindon Borough Council's finances don't allow them to join in with this. They haven't been able to offer anything. And I've got 2 more points I want to make before I hand over to Darryl. I want to just illustrate a third contributory dimension. I have the great fortune that as well as having taken over communities earlier this year, I already had libraries, leisure and public health. And we are increasingly coordinating all that we do in support of priority areas such as the youth offer. And I've got a point to illustrate that. Whereas back in 2021, pre-COVID, and while we had 10 leisure centres in-house, 10 leisures out, since then we've brought them all in-house. We have them all as our train set, our 20 leisure centres along with 30 libraries. And in that process, we've shifted the membership of those leisure centres from 500 11 to 16-year-old children to now approaching 3,000. And I just want to make that point that this is huge in terms of getting young people involved and robust and developing them. And the final point is a plug here. Yesterday I was briefed about the Young People's Emotional Health Summit, which Public Health is sponsoring and running on the 10th of March here. I would like to plug it, and I think it would be a good event for those who are interested, especially your task group members, to come to. Darryl, please.
Thank you. And by way of introduction, for members that I haven't yet met, I'm Darryl Freeman. I'm the Interim Corporate Director for Children and Education and the Statutory Director of Children's Services. So I'll keep my comments brief, as Ian's covered most of the key points there, and I'm sure that you're keen to hear more about the detail of the framework from Rhys himself, who's been absolutely central to the developments that we're currently seeing. Local authorities have a statutory duty to provide a local youth offer to young people, and in line with strengthened guidance from government, which was published in September 23, are required to ensure that their local offer is responsive to the needs of young people. I should stress that the duty is not necessarily to deliver youth services, and we have seen significant changes locally and nationally in recent years on how youth services are provided and delivered. The Council, though, has an important role in enabling, facilitating and supporting the development of the offer across a broad partnership. The framework that you see today, mapped out today, marks a significant step forward in our understanding and our articulation of the local offer, together with 3 vision statements and suggested activity that we want to take forward in a delivery plan that will be developed and produced with our partners. We intend to have this delivery plan in place by April this year so that we don't lose pace and traction on the activity that we've already achieved. The local offer as presented is not what all young people in Wiltshire have access to. It is a picture of what's available across the county, but it should be recognised that there is considerable variance from area to area, and to have a more equitable offer is one of the challenges that the delivery plan will need to address. As the Corporate Director for Children and Education, the responsibility for delivery of our duty to provide a local offer and ensure the progress of a delivery plan will sit with me and with the Communities Directorate, together working with our key partners, taking a lead in its delivery. So that's where it will sit going forward. It will sit with me. It will be aligned to, for example, the early help strategy and other initiatives. And we'll probably mention later on in the director's update some of the government initiatives that are out there at the moment in terms of multi-agency early help teams and the like. But without further delay, I shall hand over to Rhys to take you through the framework itself.
Thank you, Darryl, and thank you, Ian, as well. Yeah, I'm going to run through a few slides. Just wanted to say, I think Ian's already done so, but thank you to Councillor Trigg and the task group and to Children's Select for taking these recommendations on, because I really do think that has sort of been very heavily involved in this for the last 12 months. It's certainly, I think, focused minds and really expedited some of the progress, and ultimately that collaboration, that collaborative effort between different parties has really moved things into a really positive direction, with this increased funding, better internal working, as well as external and strengthened partnerships. So ultimately, we hope that will benefit young people in Wiltshire. So a big thank you to the task group. We've now lost the slides. I can keep talking whilst we've tried to sort out the technical problems. I'll carry on. So what I'm going to just briefly update on is the youth framework itself. I'll run through how that all works and the sort of background as to what we've done to date. I think really important point to mention just on the framework is that whilst this is words on a document today, what we're really trying to strive through this is to deliver increased value and to see action that the document creates. So it's already prompted a lot of improved communication, joining together objectives and collaborative thinking, which is ultimately what we're striving to deliver and what we want to continue to build on. Ian's already mentioned this one, but just to briefly touch on, there we go, thank you very much, that we are in our one of the recommendations for 2 and 4 was with regards to area grant criteria, and we have removed that wording that says that applications are for one-off funding and not reoccurring costs. And additionally, we are updating the criteria. It's only very small modifications, but just with that updated DCMS requirements around leisure time activities, just to tweak that. Again, that was more recommendation 2. I'm not on that slide yet, but that's fine. And yeah, it's great to have Kai here and Margaret, because one of the recommendations from the Youth Partnership, from the Overview and Scrutiny Task Group was around the Wiltshire Youth Partnership. I've been very fortunate to be sat on that group with Margaret sort of lead for the past couple of years. And that is a really positive step, and the fact that we are able to provide support funding for that really is an exciting opportunity in Wiltshire, and it allows us to build on that even more. I'll just say that we did provide on the other task group recommendations that we're not talking about today. There were 9 in total. If there are outstanding questions, we provided a written update in November. But if there are outstanding questions on any of those ones that aren't talked about today, I'm happy to try my best to address those at the end. If you're able to move that on, Julie, that'd be great. Darryl set out the context as to where this is sitting, and I don't need to go over the statutory duty one more time. I think you've heard that loud and clear. But just to say, the way this whole youth framework has been delivered has been very much with the NYA, the National Youth Agency toolkit in mind, and the DCMS guidance. So that visual you can see on the right-hand side there, the 9 essentials of a local youth offer. That is what our document references repeatedly throughout. So we have looked at the entire county, all the different partners who work within Wiltshire, and how they are addressing those 9 points in there. And I think Daryl and Ian have both made this point, but just to say that what we have created is then quite high-level vision statements. After we've collated all that evidence, we've produced these high-level vision statements, and the plan following conversations today will be to take those, and you can see some of the rationale and the actions that are in the document itself, and we'll put those into a more tangible delivery plan once this framework has been agreed in this conversation. If you could move me on, Julie, thank you very much. So a little bit more about the context of how it's being developed. So to start with, we did some internal collaboration to understand what we as a local authority are delivering towards Section 507B. So that was conversations between ourselves, Families and Children's Directorate, and multiple other teams internally. We then also spoke with the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, and then our partners in the voluntary and community sector, to map out a sort of outline as to what this framework would look like. Once we had that together, we took this document along to multiple groups, to the Fact Steering Group, to the Wiltshire and Swindon Youth Work Network, to the Youth Partnership itself. And I wasn't at the Youth Council, but I know it was talked about at the Youth Council as well. The idea there was to make sure that our evidence base was as comprehensive as possible, and to make sure that when we were developing these vision statements that they had broad support from the people who would ultimately be contributing towards their delivery as well. And I'm sure Margaret is in many of these conversations with me. We had lots of feedback at every single step of the way, which was really, really welcomed. And this document, again, is sort of an amalgamation of all the different bits of feedback that we've had over the past 12 months. So hopefully it is a proper partnership approach. If you're able to move us on again, please, Julie. So, yeah, I'm sure you figured this out already if you've had the opportunity to read it, but the first 4 pages are sort of the overview, the aim, who the key partners are, and then those vision statements, and then basically from Appendix A, which is, I think starts on page 5 of the document itself, that's when you go into the full detail as to what's currently being delivered. And I've already mentioned that the 9 essentials of the local youth offer from the MY have been the basis for this. The delivery plan will follow. We will have SMART objectives alongside each of those. I'm going to talk through very briefly the vision statements in a moment and the proposed actions at this moment in time, but each one of those proposed actions will have one of these objectives. I've put in there, and it's a really important part because the Youth Partnership have their own delivery plan at this moment in time. The Office of Police and Crime Commissioner sit on that group as well. So what we need to do as we take this forward is to make sure that our aspirations and our work is completely done in partnership. So we'll be having conversations in the future about how these sort of action plans and working plans all work together. Just to say on this, it's an optional thing, but we're very happy to come back and to update on the progress of this delivery plan to Children Select on a regular basis. So we'll please bear that in mind. And I will move on to the 3 vision statements themselves. So if you could move the slide on, please, Julie. So, like I said, these are relatively high-level vision statements, and then, as you can see underneath each one, we've got more specific actions that will be proposed for the delivery plan afterwards. So the first one is all about ensuring that there is a comprehensive leisure time activities and offer for young people, regardless of where they are in Wiltshire. So the 3 proposed actions behind that are around I suppose mapping and understanding the current leisure time. We have lots of information in lots of different places. And it's something, again, we've talked about the Youth Partnership a couple of times as well, and then addressing those collaborative solutions to address those gaps. The second one is about funding. Like I said, the additional £50,000 over the next 2 years is a huge step forward, and we still have the 347,000 from area board funding into positive leisure time activities. But we know that there is still even more need for our model, which is largely delivered through the voluntary and community sector, to be supported even more strongly as we can. So looking at that more strategic funding piece is a really important step in that as well. And then something that's come up time and time again is the training and support needs for youth work capacity in the county. So that's something we've been talking about in meetings to date, but again, taking that forward to drive it even further. Thank you, Julie. Last couple. So the second vision statement is about youth voice predominantly, and how we use that to shape and influence what's happening in the county. We have, again, through this exercise, it becomes quite apparent that there's a significant amount of youth voice work that happens, both from statutory services, from voluntary sector, and our more wider partners. Young people have reported on multiple occasions that they sometimes feel frustrated that, that they're asked repeated questions and they don't necessarily see the action off the back of it. So increased sort of collaboration, coordination of surveys and engagements is one of these proposals, and that links obviously really strongly with the next 2 points here about centralised information from intelligence that is gathered from youth voice and engagement activities. And then just sharing of the best practice when we know that something works in terms of working with young people, just again, across our whole partnership here to make sure that we share that information. And then the last one is around, I suppose, the trust and respect and working together as strongly as possible. Something that has been fed back a few times is that we've got a really diverse picture of people who are working with young people. We've got volunteers, we've got voluntary sector, professional workers, we've got obviously people in children's services, we've got individuals like myself who aren't qualified youth workers, but we work well in partnership and building sort of relationships with other organisations. So it's quite a diverse picture. But something that's been fed back a few times is that they don't feel there's sort of an equal playing field. They don't always feel that trust and respect comes across in all areas of sort of partnership working. Communication could be improved upon. So that is something that we think is a really important one to address here. The Wiltshire Quality Standards, that was put in 2014 when the local youth model was first introduced. One of the proposals here is that we revisit those quality standards and we create a Wiltshire version as opposed to a Wiltshire Council version, and we see what that might look like across the piece. And then the last one on there is about increased collaboration. So myself and Simon Thomas sit on the Wiltshire Youth Partnership. We think there's even more opportunity for further involvement and engagement from across the council to work more closely with the partnership to help deliver that sort of collaborative action plan. That's it for me. Thank you very much. I'm sure we're happy as a team up here to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to pass over initially to Joe, who was the chair of the task group that looked into this, and ask if there's anything that you want to come back with, Joe.
Thanks, John. The first thing I want to say is I do recognise there has been an enormous amount of work that's got into this, Rhys, and the passion and the genuine wish to really address this and look at that is evident in the piece of work that's been done. I will come back to the fact that I find it quite difficult to look at this and respond to this without a delivery plan. So, but I'm going to park that just a moment. I think the indication of how much work has had to be done and to draw out the elements that you've done and how much time it's taken to get to this point is probably indicative of the fact that there hadn't been a focus and we'd completely lost focus to some extent on what is a very important part of what, as an authority, our duties are and what we should be doing. But as I say, I welcome of where we are at the moment. And I do, obviously, Ian spoke about things right at the beginning. I really do welcome the change with the area board criteria funding. I think that will make a difference. I'm also delighted to see funding with the partnership. Obviously, my question will be, is that enough? So I'll be asking Margaret that at some point, and how we're going to move that forward. I think, everybody in the room is passionate about how can we improve the things for our young people, and recognising it's not just about them, the improvement it is for them, but for us to be a happy, a healthy and a successful area as a whole, that relies on getting it right for young people right at the beginning. So that's why for me this is always so important, because yes, same with John, I'm involved in charities that provide youth activities, but it is about that whole wider piece for the whole community. We get this right, it has such a positive impact on everybody. But as I said, without the delivery plan, I do find it a little difficult to really look at really where are we going, what are we going to do in set timeframes. And I am very conscious that John provided a very detailed summary response. And I have to say, I largely agree with those comments that are there. I'm not going to go through those because I think John might want to do so. But I guess the one that will always worry me, and is going to be a challenge for all of us and a challenge for all the partners involved, is how we don't put over-reliance onto a charity and voluntary sector that are absolutely stretched to popping. Obviously, additional financial pressures that have come across recently as well are just making that additionally worse. And that obviously can't just be the solution, that we're able to increase that capacity without a lot more work and support, both potentially financially and time. So, as I say, I really welcome, and I can see how much work has gone in there, and I do appreciate that, Rhys, and I'm glad we've got that. It gives us a really good clarity of where we are, but I think there's still work to be done.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, I think I saw Caroline and then Helen.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to echo everybody's thanks for the work done, and Joe's point that the length of time it's taken does really point to the issues on the ground in terms of the disparity of what has been available and so on and so forth. I won't repeat that. It just seems to me, you make the point very clearly that 70% of all delivery at the moment is through the voluntary process. And I'm just a little bit worried in terms of the vision statements, for example, and some of the engagement and consultation notes, that there isn't yet enough focus on the volunteers as the primary workforce. And I don't want to call them a workforce because they're not, because they are a volunteer force. And I'm not sure, well, what I would like to urge is that in the delivery plan considerations, you really, really focus on how we can encourage more volunteers. I look, for example, to the whole communication process around foster carers, just as an example. So can we do far, far more around encouraging volunteers to step forward in the community areas? And ergo, can we also therefore do far more in terms of support for those volunteers? Volunteers are very time short. If they're giving up 2 evenings a week to run a youth club, for example, they don't have much other capacity to go on training courses or whatever. So can we think about how we might take support to the volunteers rather than necessarily expect the volunteers to come in to get a bit of support and help. So that was one thing. And linked with volunteers again is also volunteer voice. Obviously, the voice of the youngsters that we're supporting is critical, but if you don't hear the voice of the volunteers on the ground and what they face and what they have to deal with, then we might be missing something really important in terms of delivering a grounded delivery plan, as opposed to delivery plans that are a little bit esoteric, a little bit framework orientated, a little bit about let's keep on talking more. We need that delivery plan to be quite grounded. And then I had one more point, which I'm just trying to remember. Oh, that's right. One of the brilliant things I think this council has done is the work that's been involved in rolling out the training associated with, and I can't remember the title of it now, I do apologise. Anybody who works with young people and indeed vulnerable adults about seeing through their potential trauma in previous when they were younger. Can somebody remind me what that's called? Thank you.
Trauma-led.
Thrive to Thrive. Thank you very much. If you could include that kind of activity in terms of support for our volunteers, I think that would be really, really super helpful. Thank you.
Did you want to come back on any of those points, or do you want to? Sorry.
Thanks for the comments, and I'm going to almost kind of pose this at Darryl, but I would suggest this point about that Caroline, I think Joe was making a point about recruiting and training and helping volunteers. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what the £100,000 is about in this. If anybody's going to contradict me, and if you want to increase that pot, which is now 200,000, well, first port of call I think would be to talk to Swindon Borough Council, because who are not contributing anything at the moment. Now, it has been very difficult finding £100,000 in a very tight budget. Now, and going back to this balance about are we depending too much on the voluntary sector, or are we doing things too directly? I think that is the whole point in trying to bolster that capacity building organisation in this and funding them. And I think at the receiving end of this, people would much rather be talking and being supported by a part of the voluntary sector rather than a council officer or the council in this. I personally feel that that indirect approach is actually a much more sustainable approach, not just financially, but presentationally and kind of and acceptable in the eyes and the kind of perception of the people who might be volunteers in that. Did anybody else want to join me on that?
Can I just pick up on that point? I think it's really, really, really important. I can speak from my personal experience where I run the charity that supports the youth club that runs in Marlborough, and absolutely we're really, really keen that the youth club is run by the volunteers and not run by employed people from the council, because it kind of just gives a completely different slant. Having said that, I do think there's an important role around apprenticeships. If you want to build youth workers' workforce of the future, then apprenticeships, I think, is a very strong way forward. And the beauty of apprenticeships is they tend to be young people. So they're in that kind of sweet spot of maybe between 18 and 25 doing apprenticeships who the young people directly relate to. So there's an added benefit there. And one of the things you can, I would urge you to think about considering is encouraging the town councils, the larger parish councils, to think about youth worker apprenticeships as part of their own workforces. I say this because we've done it in Marlborough. It's new. Our youth workers only been in for apprenticeship workers only been in for 4 months, but it's really, really having a fantastic effect. And by having an apprentice youth worker at the sort of larger town level, he's able to bring in lots of partners working together. Make sure that youths are considered in all sorts of local town activities, not just those that are specifically focused on youth. So just another point in there around, I really agree that volunteer-led is much better received in the community, but there is also a role, I think, for councillors, whether at Wiltshire or town level, to do the coordinating and bringing together and the connecting up.
I know that Darryl wanted to come in. I see Rita's hand, so we're coming on those points, and then we'll work through. I'll add you to my list, Adrian.
Thank you, Chair. I won't respond to every individual point, but I'd echo the point that's been made by councillors there that our volunteers in a range of organisations and right the way across the county do an amazing job. And without them, there really wouldn't be a substantive youth offer. And I absolutely agree with the sentiment that we need to do as much as we possibly can within the resources that we've got to ensure that they are well supported and well trained to do the job that they do. I particularly like the idea of the 5 to Thrive training, and we'll certainly consider that. This conversation, this debate is a useful and important one. And whilst I think between Reece and I, we probably aren't going to respond to every individual point, but the points that I just wanted to say that the points you're making are very valid and are important, and we will go back and consider them in the whole after this debate.
Did you want to come in, Reece?
Very, very briefly, John. Yeah, thanks. Just to say, I disagree with any of the points that have been made here at all. I think the idea behind this sort of evidence base, in particular, was to recognise and acknowledge the role the voluntary and community sector are playing, because it does show in there the significant role that they're playing. So that's very much the sort of emphasis here. There is no intention of additional strain. One of the other work streams that I'm sort of leading on for the council was around the voluntary and community sector and that sort of strategic partnership with the council, not just looking at young people. So it's something that's incredibly prominent in my mind when we're talking about any of this stuff. I don't know if it's okay, John, but Margaret wanted to pop in as well at some point.
I think I just wanted to respond in a positive way, but just reflect that the voluntary sector, although it uses, huge valuable volunteers in its delivery, is actually a very skilled and paid workforce as well. So I think we just need to be mindful that the voluntary sector, although, could not run without volunteers, we've got some very good voluntary sector organisations delivering youth services across the county that are delivering with skilled, qualified, paid youth workers, supplemented by volunteers in some cases, but it is that dynamic mix that's really, really important. And also just to reflect that the funding that goes into the voluntary sector, youth sector across the county is the funding from the council is actually outweighed by the charitable sector. Local Wiltshire Community Foundation and many other funders fund more youth work in this county than the council does, and I think it's important to recognise that in this discussion as well.
Absolutely. I'm going to refrain from commenting on that yet. Helen next, and then Bridget, and then Aidan.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Ian, Darrell and Reece. It's very clear that from sitting on the task group, how much work and how much development there has actually been in the thinking. Picking up on the point that Caroline's just made, what we've seen in Corsham is an absolute explosion in take-up. The Town Council has been funding voluntary provision in youth services for a couple of years now. And what we've found is that, firstly, the take-up started to dwarf the initial volunteers, so we needed to get more resourcing in there. The Town Council has committed to spend tens of thousands a year on youth provision. And the statistics I heard on Monday, which I do slightly question, is that well over 1,000 youth in Corsham are attending now an event every week, which would indicate to me rather that that's pretty much every young person in Corsham is coming to once a week, which seems artificially high. But it's very clear that there has been an absolute explosion in take up of the offer once the service has been established. So I would warn us that if that pattern is replicated across the county, then we could be looking at a real built-up, pent-up demand, which could swamp us as we're seeing in other areas. I've got 4 specific questions. Ian, you mentioned Swindon not contributing a couple of times. Is Swindon still going to benefit from the additional funding that's been brought in? In terms of the additional funding, looking at the 2021 census, there's about 21,500 people aged between 16 and 19. However you define youth, that's going to be roughly the number of young people that we're targeting. So £200,000 is less than £10 per person. Ian, I know you talked about asking Swindon to contribute, and I think that's a worthy thing to do. But what scope is there to pursue even more funding beyond that? Are there any other grants? And I take in on board what Margaret said about other sources of funding, and I point to Corsham Town Council as well. Also, bearing in mind that provider boundaries don't necessarily agree with area board boundaries, how much of, if any, of the additional funding which will find its way through to area board local youth networks or area boards in general? And how much focus will there be on enabling youth in rural areas to access whatever offer there is, thinking largely in terms of transport? So not every young person lives in a town with good transport links.
Thank you for the questions. I think Margaret maybe better answer to for many of them, but just a little bit of context to the youth partnership itself. So that's obviously a standalone organisation that has developed its own delivery plan and delivery and action plan that is the members of that group are the voluntary and community, a sort of significant number of the voluntary and community sector. So they put a proposal forward, so I'm speaking on behalf of it, I'm conscious, but they put a proposal forward to Wiltshire Council, Swindon Borough Council and the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, setting out over 2 years what their aspirations are and what it would cost to deliver it. So the situation we've got currently, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, but the situation we've got currently is Wiltshire Council have committed to that. The Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner have pretty much, I think, committed to that, and Swindon Borough Council have said at this moment in time they're not able to fund it. So my understanding, but I don't know why I'm speaking on behalf of it, Margaret, apologies, is that it would be focused on Wiltshire for the time being, but there's still an invitation for Swindon to be to come part of that. And the only other question I was just going to address is the intention isn't that money filters to the area boards. This would be going directly to the youth partnership. But obviously, the anticipation with the youth partnership is that it would be working with all the different, well, as many as we can, different organisations, voluntary community sector organisations from across the county. So it would be indirect benefit, obviously, from that. Do you want to, probably makes more sense for you.
Just to add, the Wiltshire Youth Partnership developed from the voluntary sector, initially kind of for the voluntary sector. The reason the footprint is Wiltshire and Swindon, Wiltshire Community Foundation covers Wiltshire and Swindon, and we'd been working at that level for about 4 years, and that informed the partnership development. So the funding from the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner will cover both areas, but we fully recognise the funding from Wiltshire Council will only support Wiltshire. So we did also ask Swindon Borough Council to be a core partner so that we could have a consistent offer. We now, hands up, we've got this dilemma or we've unfair funding, but we will make sure that that works appropriately. So the core offer of the Wiltshire and Swindon Youth Work Network will cover both areas because it's supported by the Police and Crime Commissioner, but a lot of the additional support and investment and time that we'll put in will focus in Wiltshire because the bulk of the funding is coming from Wiltshire. So hopefully that reassures Wiltshire Council's money won't, although it funds the whole and there will be work in Swindon, that aspect will be funded by the Police and Crime Commissioner.
So just to put that into really simple terms, because it's equal funding going in from the town and the police commissioner, does that mean that 75% of the funding and 75% of the employment time of whoever might be employed from that funding would be concentrated on Wiltshire?
That's the aim. We need to work out specific details, but fundamentally, yes, I so. Yeah, I mean, we've literally had confirmation we're getting the funding this week. You know, we've been working on this plan and funding aspiration for over a year or more. We equally have to work out the exact delivery plan of how that's going to work, but in principle, yes.
Okay. Helen, had you finished? Yep. Okay. In which case, Bridget.
Thank you. I'm still a little confused by this funding that's going to the Wiltshire Youth Partnership and this. And you say it was for core funding. Core funding of what? Is it core funding for training of youth workers across the county, or is it to fund the youth partnership itself?
So there were a number of strands. One is to enable the youth partnership to recruit a youth partnership development manager. So for the last couple of years, Wiltshire Community Foundation effectively have been doing that for free, and we no longer have the capacity to continue offering up that resource with without any financial support. So it will enable the recruitment of a part-time development manager. That will enable the continued work of the Wiltshire and Swindon Youth Work Network and the partnership itself to operate and function and provide capacity in the partnership. And then the model that we came up with, because Wiltshire Community Foundation is a funding organisation, we will host, with the funding, a youth work capacity and training support grants programme. So we will issue, aligned with the Youth Partnership Action Plan, strands of work that then will be purchased through grants with that capacity grants programme, if that makes sense.
Lovely, thank you very much. I just was a little bit nitpicky about Vision 1, where it says all young people in Wiltshire have sufficient access to safe, diverse and engaging leisure time, blah, blah. What's the definition of sufficient? Is there a some sort of guidance somewhere about this? I'll just park that one. And then, of course, my other thing, you asked us for something for the new council to look at. The delivery plan is going to be all important here. There's a lot of fine words about having this vision, but it all boils down to that delivery plan. And we need to see it, and it may not come here in time for this current council, but it's definitely something that should be on the forward work plan. Defines sufficient.
I don't know if anyone wants to come back on what Bridget's already...
I'll have a stab. I don't think you can. Wouldn't it be nice if £100,000 was exactly the amount of money you needed, you know, and not just a number? Well, of course it's a number, because it is a very undefinable thing that we're trying to tackle here. And we've just heard from Helen how much, in the word she used, I think several times, was explosion in this. So this is a moving feast. But £100,000 in what we're putting into this is a good deal more than zero. And so we will see where we get to with that.
Yeah, I wasn't nitpicking about the 100,000 at all, and I understand the work that it's going, or what it's going to provide the Wiltshire Youth Partnership with. I was just asking, what is the definition of sufficient?
Adrian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd like to speak on behalf of the volunteers, being one of them. So I'm seeing this from the other angle at the ground floor, and also from the funding side of it. Personally, I'm very disappointed it's only 100,000. I don't think the council should be proud of that figure or start beating drums about it. It's totally insufficient. I was with Community Foundation yesterday afternoon, their CEO, and Oliver Self, who Margaret will know. And we were talking about considerably larger sums of money than this purely for youth work within the whole of Wiltshire. And it was pointed out by the foundation that when they do a programme, it has to cover the whole of Wiltshire, including Swindon. They cannot separate. You can't provide funds and ask for it to be a specific area. You can if you've got an individual donation, but if you're getting matching funding, which we are doing from Community Foundation, then you can't. And this has matching funding. So I'm a bit confused by the conversation that's been had there earlier. I have to agree 100% with Caroline, Joe and Bridget. A delivery plan is the most essential part of this. Otherwise, this is all just words. And we need to see what is going to physically happen. My personal concern from a volunteer point of view, and when we're doing work within the community, is A, getting enough volunteers. Funding for youth workers tends to be mostly financed by churches, and you'll look, when you look at the funding for most youth workers, a highest percentage of that comes from Christian organisations, yet we as a council bar funding to Christian organisations. So that in itself creates an obstacle. Obviously, if the youth worker if it's not proselytisation and it is doing youth work, we can overcome it in that way, and we do on many occasions. But the biggest thing that the voluntary organisation needs is a source of funding to pay for a youth worker. And I agree with Caroline 100% with the apprenticing. That works really well. But an apprentice needs a fully qualified youth worker alongside. Otherwise, there's nobody training them on a day-to-day basis. So we need a balance there, not just apprentices across the board. And to deliver this, we need a delivery plan. We need somebody from the council leading this, not relying on the voluntary organisations to run the whole show and making it happen. That is somebody from the council signposting people as to where they get the funding, where they get the training, and where we make sure all the safeguarding and all the other criteria that's required with youth work is being complied with all these organisations. Because they're all disparate little groups and we need somebody who's coordinating it from the centre. And Wiltshire Council is that body. And it's not doing that at the present moment. And I think that's the gap we need to fill.
I'll come back on that. I'm sorry you're disappointed that we are continuing to fund that, because I think there are lots of councils who wouldn't even do that. And I think I'm disappointed that you're disappointed, and I think we've done a lot to encourage that money to go through, and so I'm sorry that you feel like that. I think the other point that I want to make is that there's a lot of emphasis on youth work and youth workers and youth clubs. And yet what we know from young people is that is just one activity that they would like to do. And I think to Bridget's point about sufficiency is what's right for that young person. If they're passionate about music, they don't want to sit in a youth club, they want to be part of an orchestra. If they love swimming, they want to have access to leisure centres that we invest in and are there. And as Ian says, we're increasing their membership. And I think looking at youth work is quite an old-fashioned way of looking at how young people want to grow themselves. And I think it's just very one-dimensional. And I think we've had that debate here. We had that debate 12 years ago. There are lots, the areas that I represent, we've got fantastic youth clubs going on that didn't exist before because we only had a one-size-fits-all top-down model from here in Wiltshire. And yet, by having this community model, it's much more nuanced and much more what young people want that's right for that area. And that's what I really want to encourage. And I think this youth partnership can do that because it's got a much broader perspective. And I think we need to get away from this obsession with youth centres and youth clubs. Let's look at it as all positive activities for young people that help them to grow.
Go on.
I want to agree and disagree. So I want to agree, absolutely. And, the vision is very clearly about sufficient access to safe, diverse and engaging leisure time activities. And of course, that includes sporting activities, arts, culture, and so on activities. Couldn't agree more. One of the issues, however, is that many children, for one reason or another, do not get pointed at those sorts of activities. And where the youth clubs and the youth workers, I think, play a particularly important role is with those youngsters. So obviously, where those youngsters are pointed at all those activities and their parents ferry them around from A to B and so on and so forth, absolutely brilliant, really important. Man must not forget those, and they all offer, I'm quite sure, opportunities to the more economically deprived youngsters in the areas as well, and that's all brilliant. But there is this strata of young people who, for one reason or another, do not access those opportunities. And I do think that's where youth work and youth clubs play a hugely important role. And of course, the youth workers can play a hugely important role across all of those organisations, as well as other youngsters.
Can I just come back on that? Because of course they do. I just want to try and make sure people aren't only focusing on that. And I think that, that can be a mistake. And that was the thing. If you sit down with young people, which is what we always do, it just, we as adults can be very preachy about what we think is right. And yet, if you ask a young person, they'd say, I don't want to be in a youth club. I want to be out playing football. And that's what's important to me. And I think we mustn't forget that.
John, Chairman, I think this has really all been terribly helpful in all of this. There are many different voices, there are many different views. What is important is that we're here talking about it and taking it forward, and that we have momentum in all of this. And I'll finish on saying, can I reiterate my plug for the 10th of March, Young People's Emotional Health Summit, and there will be youth voice at that. And then you'll hear what they and others think on a kind of bigger stage about all of these things, rather than we who, I don't know, average age in this room, perceive as being their view.
Oh, don't sum up yet, Ian. I've not had my say yet. I'm waiting for everyone to. Anyone else wanting to come in, or can I get started? I recognise the work that's gone into this. First of all, I do recognise the work that's gone into this. I can't disguise my disappointment that it's taken us 18 months to come up with something that says, oh gosh, yes, we need to do something. Because what we don't have here is an action plan of anything we're going to do. What we've got here is a recognition that there is a job to do and a definition of some aspects of that job. But just before we delve into a little bit of detail on this, I think there's a really important conversation we need to have about what is youth work and what are the council's obligations under 507B. Because it's very, very, very easy to turn any work with young people into saying, oh, that's our obligations under 507B, that's our youth work offer. And a youth work offer is very, very different than a provision of activities for young people. In 2014, I doubt that there were many less or more football clubs, hockey clubs, netball clubs, insert name of sport club here, insert name of music group here, or any other specialist activity for young people running then than there are now. And I actually doubt that very many of those groups that were running then would point to the new youth work model and say, gosh, that's been our salvation, that's what's changed where we are, that's what's enabled us to do all that we can do. There will be a few isolated examples, as there are a few isolated examples of outstanding youth work, like Seeds for Success, down in in Bridget's patch, that are delivering proper youth work. But we are mixing up now providing activities for young people with providing youth work. There is no doubt that nationally, and particularly here in Wiltshire, we have seen an explosion in challenges affecting young people, particularly with young people's mental health. One of the reasons for that, we've lost so much of the early help service we had. What was the early help service we had? They were called youth workers. And young people would go to a youth centre, maybe just as a one-off, and they'd talk to a youth worker. And through that youth worker, they'd find the help and the advice and the guidance. Because this youth worker didn't spend 4 years at university being trained how to kick a football or how to conduct a school orchestra. They spent 4 years at university learning how to provide early help support and guidance to young people. That whole service is gone. It's nowhere. And what worries me about the headlines that I read in this report, and there are no more than headlines to it, and I haven't been involved in the youth partnership formation of this for quite a while now. I assume because I was having a hat in both sides, and it was felt it was best not to. But what worries me in this is I'm not seeing it providing an awful lot more than what the Community Foundation has wonderfully been given us, and I suspect Margaret, in an awful lot of her own time,
has been giving us over the last few years. I'm not seeing something in here that says, here's a programme in how we're going to be bringing out more training. And with my trustee of the National Youth Agency hat on, I can tell you that it's predicted that within 18 months to 2 years, there will not be any qualified youth workers working in the youth sector anymore. They're running out. Nobody's training them. And the opportunities aren't there. I applaud what you're doing in Marlborough. Absolutely applaud what you're doing in Marlborough in taking on an apprentice. But the point that was made is absolutely right, that if that apprentice is working in isolation and doesn't have qualified people around them and supporting them, it's very difficult for that apprentice to be able to fully develop into that role, although the town is doing it. It's fantastic. Should it be for Wiltshire Council to fund all youth work in the county? Of course not. Of course not. And we are tragically in this world now where we are looking at towns and parishes and picking up this work. But one of the things we have got to think about is that when you ask a town council to pick up this work, and you can have Corsham who are spending, I think it's about 18,000 a year now on youth work, or you can have Marlborough who must be spending 20 plus if they're employing and all the rest of it. You can have Devices who I know are spending at least 17,000 a year because that's what they're paying us for the detached work that we offer. Or you can have Westbury who are investing what they offer and all the rest of it. Those are those towns and those towns alone who are funding that and paying for that. And you're seeing services there being offered which develop something for a wider community, but being paid for by a very few. And we can't get around the fact that the surrounding hinterlands to those towns will all be making use of those services, but not supporting them. And I don't think that's a sustainable model because, you know, I heard someone say the other week that it was outrageous what a town was looking at putting its precept up by, a cabinet member, that is, talking about it was outrageous what a town was looking at its precept up by, but it was putting that precept up to pay for the services that used to be paid for by Wiltshire Council. So I think that we need to see something that actually tells us how this investment is going to be made, what the impact of this investment will be, what the product that comes out of this investment will be, and how we will work with the voluntary sector. And those who pointed out the voluntary sector employs a lot of very good professionals. That's right. But we've got another challenge in the voluntary sector, which is that for small charities, the average funding that small charities have got in their bank accounts now is about 2.5 months nationally. That's a reality. And it's getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And there's less and less and less money to spend. Joe and I were just talking the other day. It's getting harder and harder to find funding for the services that we are offering within our respective organisations. And what we're actually talking about in Wiltshire is saying that our expectation for moving forward is that organisations like ours or new organisations coming up to work alongside ones like ours are going to be delivering more. Where is this funding going to come from? Where is all this money going to appear from? So you can laugh at me, Ian, and that's fine. You have every right to do that. But my question is, you're presenting us a document today that's telling us the solution is going to be this down the line. And my challenge back to you is it's all well and good telling us that's the solution, but the cold, hard reality for those on the coalface is that we're struggling to raise the funds to deliver the services that we're delivering. We're struggling to raise the funds to deliver the services we're delivering. Now, that doesn't mean the county has to come in and pull the fire out, pull our feet out the fire on that and all the rest of it. You know, that's for us. We're big enough and ugly enough to sort our own problems out. But what it does mean is that we can't, as a county, be saying the solution to delivering more of these services is to ask the people who can't afford to deliver what they're doing to do more. Because the funding's not there for us to put it in.
Thank you, John. I just want to make one comment.
You mentioned Westbury Area Board there. Oh, sorry, you mentioned Westbury and the terms of the facilities that your organisations offer. The funding from that comes from the Area Board, and that funding comes from Wiltshire Council. I know this is a huge topic, but I just want to make that point. So it is very valid that, you know, the councillors on the Area Board look at the situation and they've got the funding and therefore they're able to produce, you know, the work that your organisation does to come in.
Actually, just as a detail, we're not in receipt of any funding from the area board at the moment, which is why we've stopped delivering the detached services. It's only the Friday Fun Club that the church funds that we're... But I don't want to get into parochial detail because I don't think that's helpful.
Well, John, as you know, if we had endless money, we'd do endless things. And you know, every local authority is in the same situation, trying to find the best way to deliver the youth services that people want. And I think Suzanne's point about area board funding is right. We've got 350,000 a year going through the area board for youth projects. And you referred to the big towns being able to provide that. You know, I represent Bromham and Roud. You know, we've put in area board funding into Bromham, and they have got a very successful youth club working there, and the same with Roud, and the same in Devizes as well. And I think it's just the way we've got to work. It would be lovely if there was, you know, the millions that would be needed to run a universal youth service, but we knew that that couldn't happen 12 years ago. And I think the point, I think it was Helen who's made about, you know, what Corsham are doing is, I think we as local councillors have that responsibility. There is a local councillor for every area, and we have that responsibility to ensure that there are good things going on there to the best of our abilities. You know, it's not perfect, but there's a lot going on. And as you've said to me in the past, that this system whereby at least there is some freedom now as opposed to the one size fits all means, you know, we can tailor it so that, you know, Corsham numbers are going through the roof. It's right for each of those areas. And also we have to remember there were a lot of rural areas that had nothing. There were no youth services, no youth clubs, nothing, because we only had the ones that we could do in the towns. And so there are lots of villages where, you know, this is now thriving where there was nothing before. So I don't want it to be a complete sort of, you know, the whole thing is doomed. I don't think it is. There's lots of really good things going on. I think what I've found useful about this exercise is that it's pulled those strands together, relationships, you know, stronger now between communities and children's services. And I, you know, I applaud that. And I think we just got to keep going.
So I just want to come up because in our briefing before the meeting, we had an example of a strategy given to us, which was absolutely fantastic. And I made that point as they did it. It had action plans, it had to-do kits, it had all sorts of stuff that was making it happen and had evidence of impact. I think I say this carefully and almost regretfully because I've worked with officers a long time on this stuff, and I don't want to be knocking any individual officers, but the report we've got here today isn't telling us about all these spectacular things. It isn't telling us about success stories. It isn't telling us about here's examples of new things that have grown up and that we could build on and expand on and grow on. Okay, what it's actually doing is saying here's how we hope to try and fill the holes that there are. So if there is all this marvelous stuff that's happening that we can build on, where is it? And in the presentation that came out, Rhys made reference to in 2014 when we went to the community-led model, we were going to have our quality framework, the Wiltshire Quality Framework, that was going to talk about where we could give some reassurance to people about whether the provision that was being offered was something that was of a suitable standard and following the necessary guidelines and all the rest of it. Well, we're 10 years, 11 years on from that, and we're no further forward on having a quality framework. So all I'm trying to say is actually, and in my response that I did send back, I didn't send it to the whole committee, but I did send a response back to you. And in that, I did cite examples of councils who are doing different types of what I consider to be more constructive and more positive work. So I'm not just coming back to you saying it can't be done. I have come back to you and offered examples of alternatives that are happening elsewhere. And in the role that I get to play nationally, I see what is happening in a lot of areas. And I have to tell you that this isn't the cream of the crop. I just, it saddens me, it depresses me to say it, because you know how passionate about this area of work I am. And I can't hide my disappointment that this is what we see as our way forward.
Just to say, I think a lot of this has been said already, but my perspective on this is an iterative process of where we've been to where we're trying to get to. I've sat in an awful lot of partnership meetings with voluntary and community sector organisations. Obviously, there's a varying sort of perspective as to the role of Wiltshire Council, but I would say categorically firsthand that relationship is improving. And that's the reason why we're sitting around the table with organisations like that to say there's been a lot of concern about the strain put on the voluntary. I absolutely agree that we need to be really mindful of that. That's why we're sitting around the table talking to them, saying, what do you need? They've come with a delivery plan. It's not all about the youth partnership because there's hundreds of different disparate organisations as well. But the youth partnership have come forward saying this is what we feel could help complement our delivery for the next couple of years. And us as an organisation have obviously supported that. Now I completely take the point about the delivery plan because, to be fair, it is. But that's, I think, the whole purpose of this is it is iterative. So this is a step. If there is broad agreement, there is sort of, yes, we agree, those are the vision statements we want to take forward. The delivery plan, as it's said in there repeatedly, yes, that will be worked up next. In terms of timelines, I can reassure you there is an awful lot of resource and time and effort gone into creating what you've got in front of you. So I think the reality is these things do take time. As you know, it's an incredibly complex picture of people to work with. There's an awful lot of number of different partners working in this area who aren't necessarily always used to coming together and having those conversations. And just the last point, because I think it's come up a couple of times as well, just to, I suppose, a nod to my team definitely are not youth workers. We are not youth workers, but we are exceptionally good at working in partnership with community-based organisations. So a big part of what what our role is working with different organisations within those localities to try to make sure that we understand what those challenges are for young people, but also what those challenges are for the organisations working in that area. And like I said, all that sort of information as well is fed back into this. But yeah, that's it from me.
Alison.
Thank you, John. I think the original terms of reference for the work that we did was looking at how effectively the money that was given to the area boards was used within our communities and invested in our communities. From where I'm sitting, this has actually moved on to really an examination of youth work within Wiltshire, which obviously a number of people here are absolutely passionate about, and I agree. You know, that there are various kinds of different youth work. I've just been reading through again the National Youth Agency's definition of contemporary youth work, which is also quite interesting, which acknowledges that some of it is through professionals and others is actually just through what goes on within the community itself. The area board funding has always been, from my point of view, to fill the gaps between what is provided by Wiltshire Council and other agencies and what is recognised as being needed in the community. I don't think that's actually changed. I think what has changed is that certain people within the communities have actually got very upset about the amount of statutory stuff that is being offered by Wiltshire Council and has endeavoured to plug that gap by using and enhance the offer from Wiltshire Council itself, the actual social work, youth work type stuff, by providing stuff through the area boards. And that has now, in some areas, become the main offer within those areas. And I think that's where we're having this sort of a bit of a conflict at the moment, is that what I'm potentially hearing, what I've picked up through this, and I wasn't aware, and hence the work that has gone on to find out what is happening, is I was unaware also of exactly how many players there are in the field, what they are doing, which is the bulk of this report. And I think what's really being said is perhaps they're not doing their job properly and we're trying to do too much through the area boards. And so there should, you know, so through this, I think there is some feedback to the youth, to the families side of things, to say, you know, perhaps what we've recognised here is that the statutory offer needs to be a bit enhanced, and the area boards perhaps should go back to just plug in those gaps again, having recognised that some of the services do need to be perhaps revisited. That's my summary. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, you pointed at me, accused me of laughing. I was actually thinking of, to my degree, the almost impossibility of turning a clock back to whatever the year that was, that there was a substantial change. The advantage I think I have in this is I'm relatively fresh to it. I only took over communities earlier this year. And I would encourage people today to, rather than rue what, you know, might have been from years ago, which was on a model of financial model that was unsustainable, was my understanding from before, to a much more comprehensive, much more coordinated effort, and recognizing that it isn't all about one particular aspect of dealing with youth. And I know, John, you stress very much that youth work element, and it's very important to you. It's your passion. And I have to say, I prickle when people use the word passion, because it kind of suggests that others aren't as passionate or aren't as interested, which I think is not so, because I've certainly come at this and realizing just how much motivation is on everybody to make this work. And I would suggest that we collectively have our glass half full here. We have now in place a much greater understanding. We have now a much greater stronger relationship and understanding of all the players in this. And even going back to the public health, I had a conversation yesterday with Sally Johnson in public health, and the discussion was how much was the role of the family, how much was the role of the school, how much is the role of all of these in all of this. Back to my plug for the 10th of March. What we now also have, because look at the team here, is governance. We've got Darryl in charge of, and he's going to be sorting out the governance over all of what, and you wanted in this document the clear gap analysis and the tasking, etc. Well, regrettably, that's not there now, but I know he will be producing that and very clear objectives and very clear tasking and all of this. So I just hope we can finish today on a positive note in this and not kind of ruing back to what might have been if a big change hadn't happened, 10 years ago or more in this, and realize that this is a much more collective effort in all of this. And I think you'll find, as Laura was pointing out, if we talk to our customers, so to speak, they actually want all those other things that they can go to and participate in, and be it about the school curriculum, be it about what local sports organizations do, it's all a part of it. So I just ask you at the end of today that can we kind of work collaboratively to make this work, take it forward. If we can make a case for more funding, we will make a case for more funding. But money is very, very, very tight, and government is not helping us in this at the moment. So whatever motion you want to put together, I implore, please, that we have a positive one that enables us to collectively make it better for youth.
Well, I think as far as motion is concerned, all we're able to do is note the report that's been brought to us and look forward to having the detail
be brought along to a future meeting. If anybody wants to suggest any alternative working, please feel free. But I don't think we can do more than note the report. I do need to move. We could sit here and talk about this for another 2 hours. I tragically need to move things on because we've been on it for too long. But I can't not just give one response to what you said there, Ian, which is that the most important thing when working with young people is to listen to the voices that aren't being heard. And it's very easy to go along to those who are above the parapet and talk to them. But it's those below the parapet that aren't being heard that we need to listen to. And those are the ones that are always forgotten. I suggest that where the draft resolutions have been given to me here are for the committee's comments to be taken into account when developing the framework for the delivery plan to... Okay, well, here's the revised ones. For the delivery plan to be brought to the committee before it is published, and for the committee's suggestions and challenges to be taken into account when developing the framework and delivery plan. Are we all happy with that? I think that I'm going to do something which is very, very rare for us and actually ask for that. I'll move that from the chair, ask for a seconder. And okay, so that's seconded by Joe there. And can I ask for all those in favour to please show? And any against and any abstentions? Then I think that was unanimous. Okay, thank you very much. So we will move on to the safety valve report. As I announced earlier, we're receiving the safety valve report as a main agenda item to make sure that we give this quarterly update an in-depth look at and an understanding of where we are and how things are progressing on the programme. So I'd like to invite Ben Stevens to highlight the changes to the programme that have happened and to update us on how things are happening. Ben.
Thank you, Chair. So the committee will have received the report and the various appendices, including the dashboard, which has made a reappearance at this meeting. Thank you. So I'll just run through a couple of the highlighted things. That will cover bits that are in the main paper, in the update report that went to the DFE, and also from the dashboard. So the committee will not have failed to notice that growth in the HCPs has been higher than we wanted in the plan, and higher than we hoped as we were developing this. On the dashboard, which was taken at the 7th of January, we had 6,357 plans in our system, which is about 650 ahead of where we hoped we would be in the plan. And that's creating some upwards pressure in our system. We're seeing 41 more independent sector placements at the end of the last year compared to the year before. Independent sector placements are about £38,000 more expensive than a maintained special school placement. So you can start to appreciate how those 41 placements drive our overspend. And all of that is contributing to an overspend that at the end of Q2 was forecast to be 43.2 million. And that's about £15 million ahead of the planned overspend of 28 million. So it's clearly a situation that is not what we hoped when we submitted our plan, and required a rethink in terms of our approach to delivering sustainability in the SEND system, and also a reality check about what was achievable given where we are now, as opposed to where we thought we might be. So we've rebaselined the plan, looking at the existing mitigations we previously presented to the DFE, and assessing whether they were sufficient, whether they were likely to have the kind of impact we needed over a longer period, and that kind of thing. And it became clear very quickly that those interventions wouldn't be sufficient, and that we would need to consider what additional steps we could take. I mean, the original plan never anticipated that we would get above 6,000 EHCPs, and as I've just mentioned, we are already above that number. And as we're looking then at the financial impact of that, we can't find a way to make a sustainable system with the number of EHCPs we currently have. And so we have to look at how we can improve our SEND support and what is available to all learners, and how we help schools support children with SEN needs but who don't have a plan, so that we can over time expect to have more EHCPs leaving the system than enter it, and adjust that figure down to a figure that is financially sustainable. Well, I mean, it's worth stressing again, we will always meet our legal duty to provide support to children and young people with SEN. We're not going to be withholding plans from children who need them, and children who need support will always get it. But we do need to review how we provide that support and what can be provided in a mainstream school without a plan, and how we can increase what is on offer for those children and young people. So we have submitted this revised plan. It is going to Cabinet next week, so it is still subject to Cabinet approval. And we haven't yet heard back from the DfE about about their comments on the plan. But the plan essentially says we're going to struggle to get ourselves to a financially balanced position within the 5 years originally envisioned in the plan, and that we will need 7 years to get ourselves back to that place. That will allow us to undertake this work without compromising the support that we offer children and young people with SEN in Wiltshire. And so we thought it was important, despite the increased financial risk that brings, that it was important to take that step and to go for a 7-year rather than a 5-year plan. The other significant change that we've made is that we've started to be much more specific and explicit about milestones and about what we hope to have achieved by those milestones. And so that step one is trying to get ourselves by April 2026 to a point where we have broadly not got a growing number of EHCPs in our system. And we can do that through a number of relatively simple steps. I think we started to talk about this at the last Children's Select, but I have presented this at a number of meetings. And so I will just cover it again very quickly. But essentially, if we look at what our statistical neighbours are doing, what other local authorities that are similar to us are achieving in terms of their plans that they bring to an end, in terms of their decision-making processes, and in terms of their applications for a needs assessment, we can see that there's work there that Wiltshire can do when we adjust that for population size and all that sort of stuff, and we compare ourselves to our statistical neighbours. There are steps that we can take to get ourselves more to that space, and that would have that kind of impact that we're looking for in terms of evening out our system and getting ourselves to a balanced place in terms of EHCP numbers by April 2026. That then gives us the remaining 5 years of the plan to sort out the financial sustainability and get ourselves back into a sustainable place. Through those 5 years, then we start to look at how we can support children to step out of an independent sector placement that could be 30, 40 minutes away from their home to a more local school that's in their community, still giving them the support they need, but no longer travelling those long distances, and no longer in those very expensive independent sector placements. That takes time to achieve. Obviously, children who are settled in a school, you don't want to make that decision very quickly. You don't want to make that decision in a way that could unsettle that child again. And so again, giving ourselves 5 years from getting to a position where our EHCPs are no longer growing gives us that opportunity then to get ourselves to a financially sustainable position. So there are 8, the numbers changed a little bit because it depends how you cut them, but there are 8 tangible and specific steps that we have indicated to the DfE that we're taking, which are in that Appendix 1 and also highlighted in the main paper. The language around some of these has changed a little bit as we've started developing them. So the number 1, which you'll find in paragraph 25 of the paper, the first thing that we're looking at is there. It's written as addressing poor practice in schools. That obviously should be supporting good practice in schools. We're already looking at how we change the language there, but that will be looking at our data, using our data more. In a more sophisticated way in terms of, schools that are doing, schools where there are disproportionately more EHCNA requests coming in, or disproportionately more no to assess decisions being coming out of those requests. Anything that looks like a data anomaly that maybe needs a bit of support, we're then looking at how we can deploy teams like the mainstream inclusion support advisors and other teams, but particularly those MESAs, in terms of supporting those schools to have that better practice. There's a piece of work around faster support before the statutory process begins. So how can we make sure that we're putting a supportive arm around the children, young people and their families, getting them the support they feel that they need without the EHCP during those 6 weeks of the decision-making process. There's a piece of work that we're doing there. There's some work around early years. There's a huge amount of we're doing a lot of work around how we can use the early support plans, the early support assessments, and that more sort of holistic approach that's less education focused in those early years for those early years children, that maybe then helps support those children and their families to have a slightly different outcome as they start to transition into primary school. We're looking at what we can do in terms of additional post-16 ceasing. I'm sure that the committee will have noticed that there has been a sort of downward trend in terms of the number of plans that we're ceasing month on month over the last year. And we do need to make sure that we're looking at that and reviewing that. Again, statistical neighbours are ceasing again, adjusted for population size, are ceasing around 15 more plans a month than we are in Wiltshire, and we need to understand what we can be doing there and whether there's more we can do. And again, I'd just like to offer reassurance that we're not going to do that in a way that results in lots of children just being thrown off their plans without any support. There will be, we are seeing and continuing to see a decline in the number of EHCPs ceased that result in a child becoming NEET. And we would look to maintain that trajectory, because we obviously that's not the outcome that we want. There's the fifth intervention that we're looking at is celebrating success through pre-16 ceasing. So between 2020 and November last year, only 15 plans for under 16s were ceased because they'd met their outcomes on their EHCP. And we don't think that is reflective of the quality of support that those children are getting in their schools, or of the achievements that those children and young people are making in terms of their achievements. And so we want to make sure that we're celebrating the successes, making sure that we're recording accurately when outcomes are met, and we're making sure that there is a clear process for stepping out of an EHCP back into that ordinary available provision, so that they've still got the support around them, but without that plan. And we want to make sure that we're doing that in a really proactive and supportive way. The sixth intervention is about improved decision making, making sure that all of our decision making that sits around EHCPs, whether that's the decision to assess or the decision to issue or the decision to adjust funding levels or adjust a placement, that is as strong as possible in terms of the evidence that we're asking for, and that we're making the right decisions, so that the children for whom a yes is the right decision still get the yeses, and the children for whom a no is the right decision do get the no decisions. The final two are about independent sector placements and reducing the growth there. So we're looking at what we can do to accelerate the introduction of mid-phase step-downs. So traditionally, we have only looked to step a child out of an independent sector placement when they reach the end of a phase, Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, etc. And we're looking at what we can do to accelerate that and bring children back into maintained schools at an earlier time. Again, as I've already said, we want to make sure we're doing that in a really supportive way, in the right way. But we do think that's important to start looking at that and really emphasising that. And then the final one is about growing capacity through assistant education officers. Our education officers do a fantastic job in supporting schools and going out and being in those schools and offering advice and support as required. And we'd like to develop this new role around assistant education officers, increasing capacity in those teams, making sure that those education officers can do the valuable work that they need to do, and also that we've got additional capacity that can be going out and working with schools where they might be considering stepping up a child's support or advising that a child might need to go to special school, to work with those schools to review that and check that that's the right decision for that child, so that we can look at what's happening in terms of that upward pressure that I was talking about earlier, pushing children into independent sector placements. So we've modelled all of those interventions. We do think that that gets us to that balance by April 2026, and we think that then the things that were already in our plan that have a slightly longer lead in time and the impact will be felt slightly later, by then those will start to be having an impact, and that will then pull that curve down in terms of our deficit. And we're much more confident that this plan now has a level of realism and deliverability about it than I think we probably were in the one that we submitted to the DFE before. Demand in our system has kind of stabilised for the last year. The 12-month rolling average for assessment requests, which is how we measure demand, has been between 95 and 97 requests a month, which is the highest it's ever been in Wiltshire, but it has at least stayed stable, and that hasn't been the case for other South West councils. And so we're seeing that as a positive sign in terms of us having a stable demand that we can then start to model against, which gives us a much more secure position. So I think I'll probably leave it there and take any questions.
Thank you. I think one really important, I'll come to you, Mark, but one really important point to note on EHCPs, and this was something somebody said to me at an LGA thing in London recently, is that, and this has been the case with successive governments, so it's not a party political point at all, but we've got a government with two policies that work against each other. Because we've got one policy which is asking for reductions in EHCPs and reduction in spend and to target that spending more efficiently. And then we've got another policy which is that if a child has a specific educational need or whatever, an EHCP is the way forward. And until that is resolved, there'll be a very difficult thing for us at a county level to be able, because as Ben points out, it's right and proper that every child is given every opportunity to succeed. And unfortunately, at the moment, that will often mean that an EHCP is the only route that's offered. But there should be, in the development of this programme, is the promotion of alternatives that offer a better way forward. But we've got to get past the point where there's still half the system that's pushing parents down an EHCP route, even when we've got a really good, viable alternative to offer them. Mark, you were wanting to come in.
I love reports with graphs and statistics more than words, so I can read them better. One thing I noticed, obviously, the number of EHCPs being higher than forecast obviously has a large part on why the budget is so high, but what's drawn the reason for the average cost of an EHCP to go up by £2,000 in 1 year? Because it seems to me that's at least £12 million of what could be the overspend. So why has it gone up by £2,000 in 1 year? And obviously your forecast is to bring it back down to lower. Now, how are you going to bring the cost per EHCP back down?
The really key driver there is those independent sector placements. We have a fixed number essentially of special school places because we can only provide those as quickly as we can build them, and so we are constrained in that sort of middle section, if you imagine like mainstream schools and independent special schools, and so because that fixed number of special school places remains the case, the more that EHCP number grows, the more that we end up within the independent sector placements because they just get pushed up. And so it's that independent sector placement thing that then results in that additional average cost, because that's just pushing it up. There's some inflationary pressures built in there as well, but the really key driver is that number of plans pushing through into independent sector.
Part two of my question then is how are you going to bring that back down by 2028? Is it more places?
Grand claim, John. I think it's a really good question, and our specialist placement sufficiency strategy is a really big part of that. So all the plans we've got around building and creating additional specialist placements locally, so bringing those children who either are currently in independent non-maintained special school places back to local provision that's specialist but within their local community where we can do so, and obviously new placements for children being locally and in maintained special schools rather than in independent non-maintained schools. So there will be a mixture of what that looks like in terms of delivery. So some of it's about the free school, special school builds that we've got in train, including the AP free school build, and others are around expanding things like our resource bases, both in primary and secondary schools, and also where we've currently got our excellent special schools in Wiltshire, where we're looking to grow and expand those in line with demand.
Firstly, I just wanted to applaud you for doing the rebaselining and the replanning. I think sometimes it's really hard to accept that what you had in mind to do, recognising that it's not working and it's not good enough and you need to kind of go back to the drawing board. So just well done for doing that, because I do appreciate it. It's hard. I've got two questions. One's a bit detailed. How are we doing in terms of appeals and EHCPs being brought in where a parent has appealed? How is that panning out at the moment? And my other question was around my understanding, which may not be quite accurate, this government has decided not to allow free schools going ahead. And I believe we had a free school in mind for providing some of our capacity going forward. So if you just correct me or help me understand that particular point. Thank you.
Yes, so there is a new bill that's currently moving through Parliament that talks about some changes around expectations about how local authorities will be involved in potential creation of new schools in the future, which we welcome. It doesn't impact on the free school plans that we've already got approved by DfE. Those are still progressing, so we've got no change there. In terms of the appeals question you asked, that's a really important one, because we understand that with some of the transformation that we're delivering in this space, we have to be really careful and clear about the impact on families, and particularly how that plays out in terms of potential increases in requests for mediation, appeals, and tribunals. So the Statutory Send Service is doing a piece of work at the moment with our Performance and Insights team looking at exactly that and doing some statistical neighbour analysis to see how we compare. We are about to finalise our data submission for the SEND2 statistical submission that we provide to DfE in January of every year, and that's another important data set that will be published in June that will give us some really clear comparative data across the whole country about how Wiltshire compares in terms of that appeal and tribunal activity compared to other local areas.
Can I add one question? Thank you very much for those answers, really helpful. I understand we've lost some funding from the government, or we're losing some funding from the government going on linked to rurality. And I just wondered if that will have any impact in this sphere in terms of did this particular aspect of work benefit from any element of that grant, and is there any concerns in relation to loss of that grant?
So I'd probably need to defer to one of our finance specialists to talk about whether there was specific impact in the high needs block space. What I would say I know about is the fact that some of the decisions that have been made around how our schools are funded has a natural impact in terms of how able and how agile and flexible our schools are able to be in order to support all children, and particularly those with additional needs. So we know that Wiltshire is part of the F40 group of schools where we're a local authority that's one of the 40 lowest funded local authorities for school per pupil funding. And we are, of course, really interested in talking and understanding the challenges from our school leaders around that in the context of meeting the needs of children with SEND, because we're asking our schools to do more around mainstream inclusion, and the culture around that is really strong, and that sense of all Wiltshire children belonging in local Wiltshire schools is lived out by our school leaders. However, that is really challenging in the context of ever tightening school budgets, and I think what we can be really proud of, and I'll come on to the agenda item in a moment around our SEND local area inspection outcome, is that culture in Wiltshire has been recognised to be incredibly strong, and we should be really proud of that.
Thank you. I'm just looking at paragraphs 27, 28 and 28 really. Particularly paragraph 28 when it says this would leave 123.4 million deficit for Wiltshire Council to manage, which is up from 70.3 million. So that's an extra 53.1 million pounds. Is that deficit, that increased deficit, still only to do with the revised interventions that you're planning? So it could be more, well, that's subject to DFE agreement. And when does this deficit come in? Is it at the end of 7 years, or is it spread over the next 7 years?
We need to talk to the DFE to confirm their intentions, but our working assumption is that the money that the DFE are providing will still be profiled in the way that it was previously profiled. So we'll get another 5 or 6 million for the next 2 years, and then a final lump sum payment at the end of about 20 million. The DFE have been really clear that they're not going to provide any additional funding. They feel that the amount that we agreed through our safety valve agreement with them of 67 million was fair, and so that number remains fixed. At the end of the 7 years, then yes, we believe that there will still be this 123.4 million pound residual deficit. What councillors might remember is that budget setting last year, a high needs block deficit reserve was set up, and that money will be added to that over time to try and make up that residual deficit. Obviously, 123 million is significantly more challenging than 70 million. And so there may need to be further conversations that happen with the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government in terms of what happens with that residual deficit at the end. But at the moment, what we believe will happen is that our plan will be successful, and that we will end up with that deficit at the end, and that through careful financial planning, the council should be able to pay that off at that time.
Bridget actually asked the bulk of my question, but I'm still concerned about the residual impact, and it's an increase of 50 million in terms of that deficit for a 2-year extension, which seems quite high. And surely we should then be looking at trying to reduce to zero that deficit. So interested in what specific plans there are for that. And also a very high level technical question. I'm not used to the Martian numbering system you've used in the special school places filled box on the dashboard, and wondering what actual number there is there, or is that subject to is that like the star in the Office for National Statistics, which is too small to count?
Addressing that point first, yes, that looks like a formula error on my dashboard. I just need to sort that out for next time, but thank you for flagging it. In terms of the £123.4 million deficit at the end of the plan, so that is the cumulative deficit that we build up through our overspends year on year. At the end of the 7 years, we will have reduced that overspend to zero. So that deficit won't be growing anymore at that time, but there still will be the residual deficit that we have built up over the 7 years of the plan, but also over the preceding 4 years up to this point as well. The plan that was set out in the budget papers last year was that the high needs block deficit reserve would have reached a value enough that it could be paid off, and that deficit would be reduced to zero. We do accept, though, that especially given the wider challenges in local government finance, that might not be possible. And at that time, we would enter into conversation with the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government about what they would advise we do with that, because we're not able to borrow to pay that deficit off unless we receive special dispensation. And there's various other financial bits and pieces that I am not qualified to talk about that sit around that in terms of that final residual deficit. So I don't want to sugarcoat it. It's not a great position to end up in, but we do think that that's what can be achieved if we don't want to do anything over the next 7 years that might compromise the support that we're giving the children and young people.
Finally, just to bring this one to a close, I suspect this is a question more for Catherine than for you, Ben. But when we had a task group look in a few years ago now, but look into SCND, one of the recommendations from that task group was that we ought to look to develop and grow our SCN hubs that we had. At that point in time, we had a number of them in primary schools, none in secondary. I understand that there was one opening in a secondary school. I don't know if that has successfully completed, but the growth of those hubs, which would very much deal with some of the outer county pressures that you were referencing earlier on. Where are we on that programme?
Yeah, so that refers back to the answer I gave earlier around resource bases. So part of our specialist places strategy, we've historically always had a really good and strongly developing offer of resource bases in primary schools, but we want more of them because we know what an important space they fill in that inclusion continuum in terms of placements for children and families. Also around our children and families remaining part of their local school communities, protecting peer groups and relationships and friendships. And what's really exciting is the recent plans that we're seeing around how the secondary resource-based model is now growing. And we've got some lovely examples of one actually in Trowbridge that has opened recently and some really excellent outcomes from that. So it might be something that the committee wants to consider whether they want some scrutiny over our specialist place planning strategy and what that looks like in terms of deliverables and the timeline for what will be coming online over the next 1, 2 and 3 years.
But in short, are we increasing the number of resource bases that we have?
Significantly.
Across both primary and secondary?
Yes.
Right, unless anyone has anything else, is it a really urgent one? I'm just aware we're an hour behind schedule at the moment, and you all moan at me when we go home late. I know it's my fault, but it's urgent. Thank you, Carol. In which case, can I suggest that we thank Ben for this? I'm sure Ben would be more than happy to take any questions out of the chamber. So if there is anything, Carol, in particular, that you had that was burning, feel free to contact Ben. He's very good at answering. And I assume that, yeah, we're going to note the safety van report, say thank you, and note that we'll be continuing to take an update at every meeting on what's happening with it. And we look forward to hearing what the DFE say. Okay, let us move on. So the next item on the agenda is the SCND Alternative Provision Ofsted Inspection Outcome, pages 72 to 81 in our report. I'm assuming that everybody will have read the introductory report inspection. So am I coming to you for this, Catherine? So Catherine, can I ask that you give us a sort of really brief summary of the report, because we are running.
Yeah, of course, happy to do that. So on the 6th of December, the SEND and Alternative Provision Local Area Partnership Inspection Report was published by Ofsted and CQC. And this is our first formal opportunity to share that with Select Committee in terms of outcomes. So you will see we'll have appended the full report in the document pack for you. So I won't be talking through the detail of that report. And on the front page of my report, I've set out the legislation under which that inspection was carried out. So it was a 3-week inspection of the local area partnership. We took the call from Ofsted on the 30th of September. They left us on the 18th of October. And as I said, the report was published on the 6th of December. There are 3 possible full inspection outcomes that then lead to different post-inspection activity. And I've set out those at paragraph 3.1 in the report. So there are 3 possible inspection outcomes. I'm really delighted to be able to say that in Wiltshire we achieved that top inspection outcome. So the statement that sits alongside that top inspection outcome is that the local area partnerships SEND arrangements typically lead to positive experiences and outcomes for children and young people with SEND. The local area partnership is taking action where improvements are needed. That means that we will ongoingly be involved in engagement meetings with Ofsted and CQC about our progress, and we won't expect a full inspection for another 5 years. So we were delighted with that outcome and are very proud of that outcome. I do encourage everybody to make sure they've read that report. There's some lovely language in there. I think the thing that we are most proud of is children and young people with SEND are valued and prioritised in Wiltshire, was one of the statements that was in the inspection report. There are, of course, areas for development for the partnership, and we will be sharing our updated strategic plan in line with the priorities that we've been asked to focus on. I'm pleased to say that those were priorities that had already been owned and sort of referenced in our own self-evaluation document. I think it's also really important for me to say that while we're incredibly proud of that outcome across the partnership, that's across education, health and social care, and it's about our colleagues, it's about our parents and carers and our Wiltshire Parent Carer Council, our Parent Carer Forum, and it's about our staff and leaders in schools and settings across Wiltshire who have done and continue to work tirelessly to prioritise outcomes for children and young people with SEND. However, we are not complacent and we do recognise that the very positive statements made in this report won't reflect the experience of every family in Wiltshire, and because of that, we are not complacent and we will continue to be striving forward. Our strategic plan is called, our strategy is called Meeting These Together, Ambitious for All, and I think that word around ambition is the key one really, to make sure that we are we continue to be sort of relentless in that focus until we are confident that every family's experience is a positive one.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think it would be remiss to not start any response with a huge congratulations on another outstanding response from inspections to the services that we offer, and it absolutely underpins and underlines the commitment and amazing work that our teams do to deliver for young people in our county. So please pass on our sincere thanks on behalf of the committee to them. Did anyone have any specific questions they wanted to ask on that? Caroline?
I would also like to add my congratulations to everybody involved. It's just a brilliant job, so thank you very, very much. This might be an obvious one, but obviously there's a strong link between what we're doing here that's rated so very positively and the previous conversation around the schools grant position and so forth. So really my question is just about, are we ensuring that any actions resulting from this, any improvement actions, are clearly joined up and linked in with the schools grant position? And I'm sure the answer is yes, but a little bit of meat on the bone might be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely that. So we're very aware that the implementation plan from the strategy is due to come back to Children Select for scrutiny. And we took a decision when we were drafting the strategy to make sure that the high needs block, the safety valve programme, the plans and the actions that were in there would align with, we'd make sure there was alignment. So we were all working working to one plan, and the same is true in terms of the areas for development from post-inspection activity. So yes, the alignment is very clear, and yes, you're absolutely right to point out that there is, perhaps a bit of a disconnect in the fact that we are achieving incredibly strong outcomes for our children and young people with SEND, yet we also find us in this very challenging position financially in terms of high needs block overspend. It's tricky.
And you could put that down, if you were so minded, to the fact that we do our job exceptionally well, but we're doing it within a broken national system. But, Joe.
God, I might have forgotten what I was going to ask. Yeah, I have. I'm so sorry, completely forgotten.
In which case, I think we're... Laura.
Just building on your point, what's interesting, I was at a conference recently and I won't name the local authority, but they don't have any deficit at all, but they got the worst rating from Ofsted. And, that just, to me, that just summed it up perfectly, what a mess it all is. But well done to our team, obviously, but it's still, financially, it's really tricky.
And it sits on my conscience better to have a deficit, but be delivering a good service than it does. But Jane, go on.
Yes, but I think Ben explained it clearly that we still believe there are things that we can do, which still allow us to fulfil our statutory duties in the excellent way that we want to. We want good outcomes, but that can be done within a smaller financial envelope. And that's what the safety valve is around. And we really rely on working with our partners in this space, our brilliant schools who were singled out in the report as being generally very inclusive, and our partners in health to ensure that we do things in the right way. It is a broken system nationally, but we still feel that there are some levers which we can move to ensure that it is not so expensive.
Valve, and we're running very, very late.
Yeah, that's it really.
Yeah.
But just it's not a done deal. The two things are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah. Lovely, thank you. Okay, so we will note the working partnership agreement. In fact, I think we'll welcome and congratulate the team, if we may, in our minutes. The working partnership acknowledged by the report and the resulting support for children and young people. And thank you again for all that you all do. Poor Karen has hung on here for goodness knows how long. It is Karen, isn't it? If I even got the names wrong now. Katie. Poor Kate has hung on for goodness knows how long since doing the Affordable Schools strategy briefing for us earlier on. So we received an in-depth briefing earlier, which was much appreciated. The Affordable School Programme is very clearly valued by the schools that participate within it. I'm going to open it out for if there's any questions that have come up since earlier. I'm just also going to gently point out to the committee that we've got 23 minutes left and we've still got a couple of substantive items to go. So please keep any questions to short and not to big statements. Caroline.
Thank you. I really like this strategy. I thought it was really well laid out. Still too many words for me, possibly, but I like the whole approach in terms of how it was laid out and the specificity within it. The question is kind of a repeat of my previous question in terms of some of the actions in here seem to have, I'm sure you probably can't quite prove cause and effect, but seem to have had a positive impact in terms of youngsters who are less included than they might otherwise be, either because of the SEND or the economic side of it. But nonetheless, there seems to be some positive outcomes here. So again, our actions here being tied up and linked in with our the schools grant problem.
Thank you. I think the whole disadvantaged learners agenda is absolutely tied up with this as an agenda. And as a statistic for our disadvantaged learners in Wiltshire, we have 38.3% of those pupils are also have a SEN provision. So there's a very, very clear crossover for us. And so that means that we have to liaise really carefully and just make sure that we tie up all our strategies together. Thank you.
It is a quick one, John. I'm conscious in reading these reports and the previous reports, there's very little comment about the young people that are not attending school at the present moment. And obviously in the national press, that's been an issue. How are we addressing that, and how does that fit in with the previous discussions we've had with the costs of education?
So I think it's fair to say that there's a really strong focus around attendance for us as a local authority, and particularly with a disadvantaged learner lens around that. So children not in school in the context of persistent or severe absence. And I think what's really important is that the work that's described, the toolkit within the Affordable School Strategy, talks about ways in which we can overcome some of those barriers to school attendance for children and young people who might be experiencing disadvantage. More broadly, in terms of some of the developments that will be happening on a national level around the focus around children who are not in school, we really welcome those. There is the bill that's moving through Parliament at the moment is to talk about a children not in school register that every local authority has to complete. We are in a much more data-rich place already this year as a result of some of the attendance statutory legislation changes that happened in August this year, August 2024, which means that there is live daily attendance data that is reported through to the DFE, and we've also got our local solution for that through Group Call that enables our Children Absent from Education panel to do some really clear and careful work around identifying children who might be at additional risk or educational disadvantage through non-attendance. So it's a mixture really of our sort of children absent from education work and then our broader attendance work that sits across all of my services within my directorate and beyond, really, with children and families colleagues as well.
Wonderful. If nobody else has anything else, can I say thank you? I really do think that the briefing we had this morning was one of the best briefings that I've experienced. So I'm really, really grateful to that. That was outstanding. Thank you. But as a committee, I think we need to note and welcome the work being undertaken to reduce inequalities in schools. Particularly look forward to an update, hopefully, that will show you've got a increased number of schools participating and number of awards that you've been able to issue as time goes by. But thank you again for all. Okay, item 9, rapid scrutiny report, out of county education. So this rapid scrutiny was set up to consider the impact on children from Wiltshire having to go to school out of county. John Hawkins very kindly led this scrutiny exercise and is going to introduce the key findings and recommendations in the report. John.
Thank you very much, Chair. That's good of you. It might be helpful just to clarify just a few terms beforehand, please. As John has rightly said, the remit for the scrutiny was to consider education for those pupils, those students who reside in a catchment area whose catchment school is outside of the county of Wiltshire. And we're talking about a relatively small number of pupils, around about 500, mainly situated, or dominantly situated in the southwest of the county, towards the, and I'm talking about significantly distant west of Salisbury. So we're talking about the Tisbury and Mere area down the 303, for instance. And a much smaller number who are situated in the top northeast of the county, adjacent to Swindon, mainly the Broadhinton area. But I'll give a bit more detail in just a moment. I would like to thank officers specifically for the very comprehensive report that was put together, especially as the data was quite tricky to get together. For instance, separating parental preference out from the fact that some parents and pupils have no other choice but to attend these out-of-county schools. And I would also like to thank Jackie Farrell, the director of the charity Seeds for Success, for engaging with you, Chair, and the Vice Chair of the Select Committee, and also with the rapid scrutiny. So if I can just flesh out just a little bit more about the actual purpose of this report. You've got around 450, roughly, young people in the Tisbury area and the Mere area. Tisbury go to Shaftesbury School in Dorset, and the Mere area go to Gillingham School in Dorset. So that's where the predominantly pupils go, and a very much smaller number, probably around about a dozen, who go from the Broad Hinton area in the northeast of the county to Ridgeway School, Swindon. It seemed from our responses that we got that we were specifically concerned about young people with SEND, special educational needs and disabilities, and also with the HCPs, educational health and care plans, because we wanted to know what the impact of moving out of county would be, and would they be getting a different, if you like, a different response in a different area from that which would be supplied here in Wiltshire. And it's quite interesting, actually, that the two agenda items that we've looked at earlier this morning both have an impact on what we've been discussing. So if we move to our first recommendation then, that the Children's Select Committee ask officers to provide further information at a briefing for the Chair and Vice Chair of this committee, to which members of the rapid scrutiny could be invited. And there we have 7 points which we specifically would like. And I'm looking just below paragraph 33. I suppose they're all important, but I would like just to highlight the third point in recommendation 1. And if I may, I'll just read it to you because it is important. We would like confirmation of the arrangements between Wiltshire and Dorset and Swindon to ensure that there are no additional complications or delay for EHCP processes, either in its application or review, etc., for young people in out-of-county education. It does need to be absolutely clear which local authority is responsible for the management of those processes and for the young people accessing OCE. We do appreciate this is a very difficult area, but we did receive anecdotal evidence that some parents were receiving conflicting advice as to who is responsible for what. For instance, they might have been told by their catchment school that it was a responsibility in Wiltshire to deal with it, or it may have been they were told that Wiltshire responsibility, that it was that it was the responsibility of Dorset. So we do need to get a bit of clarification on that. We do appreciate this is a very difficult issue. EHCPs we've been discussing earlier just now. But nonetheless, it's important that parents feel that they know exactly who to go to, who is responsible, and that it will be dealt with appropriately. So that would be one of our first recommendation. Our second recommendation relates to data sharing, and we hope there is a way that data that is useful for charities, community groups, and organisations to show need in order that they can obtain funds to help young people in those areas. And we hope that officers can make that information easily accessible to everyone supporting our young people without increasing their own workload. And I would like to say again that the report that we received from, I think, 8 officers altogether, and I would like to thank the director, if I may, for all her team, for ensuring that that was made available to us. It was extremely helpful and very informative. Our third relates to children with EHCP, and I've touched upon that in the comment I made just now. About receiving information that detailed placements outside of county need to be dealt with effectively and efficiently, at least in the eyes of the parents and young people involved. It's again, like a number of these things, it's a question of perception. That's always an issue here. Our fourth and a fifth to that related to equality of access to community activities. We wanted to ensure that young people, even though they were attending a school out of their geographical area, had links with their local community and could attend activities. And we thought it would be helpful if providers could be encouraged to record which school participants attended. And we hope that very much that the strategic engagement and partnership managers, the SEPMs, could support this recommendation. That of course would be those associated with the area boards specifically. And again, we were very grateful for the officers' contribution there. And the same for role 5, I beg pardon, for recommendation 5, for the role of the strategic engagement and partnership management, because they have a vital role in providing the link with communities and schools. And this relationship building with out-of-county schools was needed to be given really good priority, although we very much appreciate, again, I must say, the huge workload that they, as with every other officer involved here, has. So I do appreciate that. And finally, on behalf of the group, I would like to thank everybody involved with this rapid scrutiny and very much appreciated their helpful and very positive contributions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you again for stepping up and taking the lead member role on that task group. So some clear recommendations there, which will be passed through to the executive for feedback in due course. I'm just going to ask if any members have any specific points or questions they want to ask. Bridget, you shocked me.
Yes, unsurprisingly. Actually, it's been a revelation because every time I mention children from my area going to out-of-county schools, I'm told it's not unusual that there are plenty of children all around the county who live at the edge of the county and go to other out-of-county schools. So reading this has been a revelation, and I do hope officers now appreciate the comments that I have made time and time again about the difficulties that we have had trying to get this information and assistance from officers, particularly where there are children who need an EHCP, and we want to tie that in with the work that the youth charity in particular has been doing for some of those, not excluded young people, but some of those perhaps part-time school attenders or non-attenders, and the difficulties that they have had and the difficulty that the charity has had trying to get the information. So I hope this leads, or it seems as though it is leading to a much more cooperative flow of information to and from the charity and the schools and Wiltshire Council. So long may it continue.
Excellent. I do have to say the number that really hit me on that was that there were 500 kids who are in catchment areas out of school, because that was the big difference, of course. They didn't choose to go, the catchment area, and what, 485 of them are in your patch. So I think that, yeah, maybe you weren't banging on about it all the time before. There was a point. Bridget, thank you. John, thank you again. Do you want to give any immediate response, or would you rather hold back and...
So just obviously we'll produce a report that responds in full to those recommendations. Really happy to do that. I just want to offer some immediate assurance, whether you're in Wiltshire, Hampshire, Dorset, wherever you are, we're all working to one statutory code of practice around special educational needs and disability and the process for education, health and care needs assessment, provision of a plan and then funding of that. So we'll put that in writing and explain how that works. But we have strong confidence and assurance around the processes that sit there, because we have one framework that works for all, in terms of we're all following the same rules. So just short-term assurance around that, but obviously we'll set out the specifics in the report response.
Excellent.
Sorry, because just listening to Laura when we were talking about our Ofsted report, saying how proud she is that we have got a good Ofsted report and other councils have got lousy Ofsted reports, but they aren't overspent. I don't know what the comparison is with, particularly in my area, Dorset Council is, and whether they are really working to the same levels that we are.
I was going to actually just say, Bridget, when you do that report, what would be really, really helpful to hear is, because, of course, there is the statutory requirement, and then there's the reality of the quality of what we deliver. And I think that far more than actually many members recognise, we consistently deliver way above the statutory minimum that's asked of us, which is perhaps what is represented by that Ofsted or that joint report that we looked at a couple of weeks ago, it feels like, earlier in the meeting. And I think that it is about that equality of offer for all those young people, where through no choice of their own, they're taken out of county. And I think that's the point that's wonderful. Okay, I'm going to note that then and look forward to response. We'll move on to the next rapid scrutiny report, which was the Educational Performance Outcomes Supplement, or is in the supplement, so the Educational Performance Outcomes Report. Now, of course, this was a task group that was not looking at educational outcomes, it was looking at how we report on educational outcomes to try and give us a little bit more consistency. As lead member of the group, I'll summarise the key points. We considered current performance data and trends. However, the focus of the scrutiny was to select data that would be presented to the committee in the future. We were very keen to see data presented in a way that would be easily understood and self-explanatory to support effective scrutiny. We were also keen that the report would enable committee members to relate the results of disadvantaged groups against average performances, to ease with that narrowing the gap and identifying what's going on there. And in terms of presentation, you will see that a lot of the recommendations were made to that were really all intended for ease of comprehension. It was about just making it much easier for us to be able to look at and identify trends and relationships between the different types of data. I could spend 20 minutes going into detail on all of those now. I propose not to, because I'm assuming that, don't nod so enthusiastically, Mark. I'm assuming that you have all read the report and the recommendations. So I will ask if there are any questions before I... and again, I'm not looking for a detailed response now, but is there any immediate comments that you want to make?
The only comment that I'd raise was whether, because this will be a very big report, even though we condense the data, and whether you want to consider doing a kind of primary outcomes report, and then at another point in the year, you know, probably do that in kind of November, December, when that data is ratified, and then the secondary data doesn't tend to be ratified until February, March. So we could split the two, and it would give you more detailed oversight and a less weighty report. But that's for you to
I think that would be a constructive and positive way forward. I'd have no objection to that.
Great, thanks.
In fact, I think it would be preferable, because then the primary data is not so out of date by the time that we're looking at it. Fine. Okay, so let us move on then to our regular updates. We've done safety valve, so we'll go on to school Ofsted judgments. I think just the thing I want to say as we start the school Ofsted judgments is we're really in this new reporting cycle now. It's very hard for us to do some of the comparative stuff. So, but if there's any key points you want to bring out, Louisa.
No, exactly that, because you've got the published data. Actually, when I wrote this, we'd only had 4 published proper Section 5s at that point. So, and as you know, it's not a singular judgment anymore. And also, we're only in a 1-year period until Ofsted publish what this new framework would look like and how they are going to actually report those judgments. So we're kind of in a transitional phase. So what you've got in the report there is in table 1, I suppose that's the bit where you can see Section 5 out. That's the full Ofsted inspections. We've got the national compared to South West, although obviously the data there is incredibly skewed because it's 4 schools against, so it's difficult to make comparisons. The positive around that is actually we had 1 school which, if you want to take old money, was broadly requiring improvement, which is kind of slightly better actually than what we were expecting. So although that's not, that's where we are and we're working with them, the rest of them were really positive outcomes with a mixture of goods and outstanding. So we're really positive about that. Sorry.
It's okay. It's just I'm sorry. I'm trying to bring. Can I just pause you 1 second,
Sorry.
Laura? Is there anything specifically that you need to tell us before you disappear?
No, there isn't. Yeah, it's just we're interviewing for the DCS this afternoon and we've got to go and prepare. So apologies.
No worries. Carry on, Louise.
No trouble. Okay, so you've got the data there. What I'm hoping is that, because we have had lots of inspections, is that I can do some nominal trend data, because we have got these, although when we had the singular judgments, they still reported against these categories. So we can do something. I just need to work with the data team to produce something that will give some sort of trend data with a caveat that it's small numbers. So table 2 shows you your Section 8 ungraded inspections. And again, that's that mixture of the kind of good and outstanding schools getting an ungraded inspection and also the monitoring inspections of being inadequate and requiring improvement schools. All of those have been really positive. And you can see there that actually those outcomes have been that standards are maintained or there's nothing there of concern. So we're really pleased about that. So that's kind of my snapshot, unless anyone's got any questions.
Brilliant. Any questions? No, I think you were safe. DFE changes are there, pages 195 to 204. As ever, incredibly grateful to whichever poor sod of an officer it is who has to write the Wiltshire response on them all. But it's improved that report tenfold since we were getting that. So really, really very grateful for that. I would suggest, because we're running out of senior officers, that if there are any specific questions on any of those, if you email them in, we'll get you a written response. So coming on down, Schools Forum report is in your agenda pack. Corporate Parenting Panel, you have a report in the pack. We don't have Peter today to give us an update, so that's fine. So directors' updates. Who wants to kick us off with anything that we need to know?
I'm just going to keep it brief because I've already done the Ofsted inspection outcome and that would be our big good news story and update for this round.
Anything that you want to share?
Yes, just in terms of the Canon's House report, Ofsted report, which will probably be coming here at some point, that we had a good outcome, so it was good overall, but with outstanding for leadership and management, so that was really positive for the staff at Canon's House and everybody that's been supporting them. The other updates are already in the briefing that's been provided.
Lovely. And I think a real congratulations to Canon's House for that. To have gone from where they were to have an overall good with outstanding leadership and management is really, so please pass on again our congratulations to them and our thanks to them, because the work that they will have put into that will have been considerable. It says Cabinet Member and Portfolio Holders update. Your last woman standing there. Anything that you want to say on behalf of everybody?
No, nothing specific, thank you.
Lovely, Suzanne. Thank you. I can't think of anything specific on a chair's update that's worth keeping you here past 1 o'clock. So now the eagle-eyed members of the team would have spotted that there wasn't a report on overview and scrutiny activities included or attached today, but the committee has received 2 rapid scrutiny reports in the main agenda. There is a task group also underway on mental health support for children and young people, being chaired by Carol, and there's a rapid scrutiny of youth homelessness scheduled for the 23rd of January. And I think that then brings everything to a close. So we will end the meeting there. I was just desperately trying to see when the date of the next meeting was. 11th of March, there we are. 11th of March, we all gather again to enjoy. And there we are, we actually only ended up 4 minutes over.